The young Wehrmacht soldiers' hands trembled as he rifled through the dead Americans packed near the Ardennes forest in December 1944. His unit hadn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days, and the bitter cold had turned his fingers blue. Past the ammunition and the soggy letters from home, he found something that made him pause: a small brown bar wrapped in wax paper, stamped with the words D Ration. He'd seen these before. Every American soldier seemed to carry them, sometimes 3 or 4 at a time. His commanding officer had dismissed them as typical American excess. Why waste valuable pack space on candy when you could carry more ammunition? The German laughed bitterly as he tore open the wrapper with his teeth. Let the foolish Americans have their chocolate. Real soldiers didn't need such luxuries. The bar was hard as a rock, and he had to use his knife to chip off a piece. It tasted terrible, barely sweet, waxy, with a chalky texture that stuck to his teeth. He almost threw it away. But something made him keep chewing, and within 20 minutes of forcing down half the bar, he noticed something remarkable. The violent shaking in his hands had stopped. The fog in his mind began to clear. His body, which moments before felt like it might simply give up, suddenly had energy again. The German soldier stared at the remaining chocolate in his hand with new understanding, but by then, it was already too late. What the German High Command had failed to recognize, what they'd mocked and dismissed as American softness, was one of the most brilliant pieces of military engineering in modern warfare. The D-Ration chocolate bar wasn't candy. It was a survival weapon. In 1937, Colonel Paul Logan of the U.S. Army approached the Hershey Chocolate Company with an unusual request. He needed a chocolate bar that could withstand extreme temperatures, fit in a pocket, taste just a little better than a boiled potato, wouldn't melt in the tropical heat or freeze solid in winter, weighed exactly 4 ounces, and could provide enough calories to sustain a soldier for a full day if necessary. It needed to be so unpalatable that soldiers wouldn't eat it unless they absolutely had to, yet nutritious enough to keep them fighting. It was an impossible task. Hershey's chief chemist, Sam Hinkle, worked for months, creating a formula that mixed chocolate with oat flour, skim milk powder, and massive amounts of sugar. Each bar packed 600 calories, more energy per ounce than almost any other food a soldier could carry. The bars were manufactured to be nearly indestructible, pressed under extreme pressure until they could survive being dropped from airplanes, buried in snow, or baked in desert sun. The taste was deliberately awful. Soldiers nicknamed them Hitler's secret weapon because of how they affected digestion, and complained the bars were so hard they could break teeth. Perfect. It meant soldiers would save them for genuine emergencies rather than snacking away their survival rations on the first day of a march. The German military, meanwhile, had taken the opposite approach. They'd calculated rations down to the minimum calories needed, prioritizing efficiency and weight reduction. Their field rations consisted mainly of dark bread, canned meat, and ersatz coffee. As the war dragged on and supply lines crumbled, even these meager supplies became unreliable. German soldiers began to suffer from what military doctors clinically termed exhaustion, but what was really slow starvation. By 1944, the contrast had become stark. American soldiers carried 3 days' worth of survival rations on their bodies at all times. Each man was a walking supply depot, capable of sustained combat operations even if cut off from supply lines. The chocolate bars alone could keep a soldier functioning for 3 days. Add in the K-rations, and other portable food supplies, and an American unit could operate independently for a week or more. The Germans noticed patterns they couldn't explain. American units fought with relentless energy even when surrounded. They didn't slow down in the afternoon like German troops did. When supply lines were cut, Americans seemed to have infinite reserves while German units collapsed within 2 days. Intelligence reports kept mentioning the chocolate, but senior officers dismissed it as irrelevant. Food was food. Calories were calories. But they weren't. The specific formulation of the D ration meant rapid energy absorption. The sugar hit the bloodstream fast, stopping the mental fog and physical tremors of calorie depletion within minutes. The fats and proteins provided sustained energy for hours afterward. A soldier could go from the edge of collapse to combat ready in the time it took to choke, down a bar and wait 20 minutes. It wasn't just food, it was emergency medicine in a wrapper. The Battle of the Bulge revealed the devastating asymmetry. German soldiers, already undernourished from months of declining rations, launched their winter offensive with barely 3 days of food supplies, betting everything on capturing American supply depots. When the gamble failed and they found themselves trapped in the frozen Ardennes, entire German units began to collapse not from combat losses but from simple starvation and hypothermia. Their bodies, already depleted, had no reserves left. American soldiers, surrounded in Bastogne and cut off from supply, kept fighting at full strength. They had their emergency rations. They had their chocolate. When the siege finally broke, German prisoners couldn't understand how the Americans had endured. They'd been cut off for over a week. Their situation had been desperate, yet they'd never weakened, never slowed. The Americans shared their D rations with the prisoners, and the captured Germans experienced firsthand what they'd been fighting against, not just better weapons or more supplies, but an entirely different philosophy of warfare. One that understood a soldier's body was a weapon system that needed fuel, and that 4 ounces of terrible tasting chocolate could mean the difference between victory and defeat. By war's end, Hershey had manufactured over 3 billion D-ration bars. They'd gone ashore at Normandy, fought through the Pacific Islands, marched across North Africa, and sustained soldiers in every theater of the war. Countless American lives were saved by the simple fact that a soldier, exhausted and cut off, could reach into his pack and find one more day of fighting strength, wrapped in wax paper. The German military industrialists who'd mocked American chocolate soldiers learned the truth too late in the frozen forests and bombed-out cities where their armies collapsed, not just from defeat, but from hunger. The Americans hadn't brought chocolate to war because they were soft. They'd brought it because they understood something fundamental about modern combat, that wars are won not just by the soldiers who fight hardest, but by the ones who can keep fighting when everyone else has already fallen.